The place to be is living free in Tennessee.
Does this make the sound better? How's this? Blah, 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 blah. How's the sound working now? Is Tactical in the house? Bring my other computer, please. Does the sound better now? Okay. We're going to start the whole thing over, and we're going to have this conversation, and I have another computer as backup. And I'm going on the room mic now. The entire studio had to be reset in the last 10 minutes, which was kind of crazy. Thank you. And it was a little crazy. So we'll start over. Welcome to the Living Free podcast, where we talk about building a life without limits. Today is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. And this is episode 3 of the Living Free podcast. And I got stood up by my interview. I actually just got an email from him, and he did not get the link because the person who set up the interview did not send him the link. So I'm going to try to bring him on to the podcast now. And I'm going to copy the whole thing, and I'm going to reply to him. And then we'll go from there. Anyway, while he gets set up, I want to talk to you about the most important part of building a life without limits, and that is taking care of our fellow folks when they experience problems that are bigger than anything you can prepare for. And we've got a lot of that going on. I'm going to close my studio door too. We've got a lot of that going on in Western Tennessee. We had a storm starting last week on Wednesday that did not end until Saturday. And that was crazy. It was really crazy. I got my best news on what was where from the Ryan Hall Y'all channel, although other weather channels on YouTube were covering it really well. I was not getting terribly good information from mainstream news because they were very interested in where the biggest part of the storm was. And what Ryan Hall does better is he talks about, like, yes, this is where the problems are. This is where the problems are going to be. Okay. So I just want to point that out, that part of preparedness is in building a free lifestyle is weathering things that go wrong. And when that happens, you have to get good information. I was getting information from my weather radio. I was getting information from Ryan Hall. I was getting information from the internet, from just looking at the radar. we were lucky, and like even in the catastrophic flooding level of rains, the holler really didn't get rain at all. We didn't get rain until Saturday. And then we got about 6 inches of rain and more flooding at the barn, and like just normal flooding. I'm going to call it normal flooding. But what we've got in the western part of the state is Summer, Tennessee was just totally annihilated in parts of that town by a tornado. And Chris Watkins has sent me some photographs from that part of the state. Brian Reisinger is in the background, so I'll bring him on in a second, but hopefully he's hearing me so that he knows that he's about to come on. Brian, I'm covering some things we need to talk about with my community here related to the weather we got. Anyway, so Selmer was decimated, and Grindstone Ministries is headed out there. They may already be on the ground. If you want to donate money to help with the victims of that tornado, give Grindstone Ministries a donation. But more importantly, if you have time to go help, sign up with them to go help, or just get down there. Chris Watkins sent me some video and some photographs of his team cutting out trees that had just been thrown all over the place and flattened houses. Well, since that time, to the north in Union City, where our buddy Kurt Duggar is, who does the paramotor work and now has a pilot's license, Union City, half of it has been evacuated. Entire counties are being evacuated. They don't have water in the area for at least 5 days, which means we may be starting to bring some caravans of water in there. This is just like what we did in North Carolina. I am not raising money personally through that, but if we get to a point where we need to raise money, we'll talk about it. But what you can do right now, especially if you're in the state of Tennessee, is work with people on the ground. Go to Telegram, to the LFTN Flood Relief Group, and post that you're interested in helping. Kurt Duggar has been on there. He's our man on the ground in the area where they need water and food and all of those sorts of things. And he can help us have a connection so that when we drive in, there's somebody who can actually distribute it. Because what we don't want to do is flood them with bottles of water that they cannot distribute. Okay. That's rule number one. Have somebody on the ground. I will keep you guys posted of this. I'm technically on vacation this week because my family's in town. But I wanted to get the word out on this episode, and I'm really excited that Brian got the link that I apparently sent to the wrong person this morning. So he was kind enough to say, hey, how do I get on there? So, okay, now we get to talk about the Living Free podcast interview that's going to happen today. Brian Reisinger has written a book recently that's called Land Rich, Cash Poor. And we're going to talk about the plight of the farmer and what that's like to build your life that you want to live when we have the type of intrinsic structures here that can interfere with production in a situation like that. And I haven't read the book, so I get to interview him from the perspective of not having read the book, wanting to read the book. So with that, I'm going to bring Brian on. Welcome to the show.
Hey there, good to be with you. Thanks for having me. Oh, can you hear me okay?
I can't hear him at all. Yeah. So we didn't get to do the tech test, guys. This is my fault. I didn't realize that the email they used to sign up for this was not his email. So when I sent the links out, he would have been on way earlier. But it looks like his audio is not connecting with StreamYard. And the question is, so your mic's good on my end. If you are using the built-in like Apple Safari browser, that will happen, or anything Internet Explorer-ish. So if you have Chrome or Brave or Firefox, those browsers work better. I don't know if that's maybe what's going on using Chrome. And the other, so try logging out and back in and see if it sends up a pop-up saying, hey, use my mic and speaker. So sometimes people accidentally say no to that, and then it happens. Anyway, so back to the flooding, guys. We're finally getting information out about that. The only information I've been able to get has been directly from people. And were you guys hearing? Okay, so I wasn't hearing him. So now I need to look at my preferences. What I have going on here is that I'm on a different computer. So I see what's happening. Internal spill. I bet I can hear him now.
No?
I can hear you now. Brian, welcome to the show.
We're here. Good to be with you.
So this is my studio computer. And when I went to plug it in today, it decided it didn't work. And I had accidentally spilled a whole cup of coffee on it about a week ago. So I think that's what happened. So I'm on my Hollow Roast label printing computer. And so probably any tech glitch that happens is my fault because I'm not in my normal, like I can't use my mouse or anything. So we're going to have a fun one today.
No worries at all. I know how that goes when you don't have your usual command center. That can throw everything off. So
yeah. And then I didn't realize I had sent some other random person your login information this morning. I was like, well, I guess he won't be here. So we'll talk about flood relief.
Well, no worries. I'm glad to be with you. And I'm glad also that you're getting the word out there and flood relief. I mean, my prayers go out to everybody in Tennessee. You hate to see that devastation anywhere. Tennessee is a special place to me, having lived there for a number of years in between home in Wisconsin and other places. And it's a special place and it's incredible people. I was there during the 500-year flood that Nashville faced a number of years ago. So I've seen the resilience of the people of Tennessee. But I know you guys need all the prayers and help you can get. So I'm glad you're raising awareness of that. And I'm wishing the best for everybody that you know.
Yeah, we've got a challenge out in the Union City area in that the officials don't want people just hopping in their boats and rescuing people. Yeah. And that happened a few years ago. And this time what the people are doing is ignoring them and just rescuing people.
Yeah.
So, which is typical of Tennessee. And that happened in 2010 in Nashville when we had the Nashville flood. That was a crazy flood. This is on that scale at this point. It's just not in downtown Nashville, thank goodness.
Well, you see the strength of the volunteer state when you see people who are stepping up and doing things and seeing what they can do to help. So,
yeah, cool. Okay. Who or what is a Brian Reisinger and am I saying your last name right?
You are. You got it just right. Yeah.
It's my German background. That's a very German sounding name. I don't know if it is, but tell us like who you are, how you ended up coming up with the idea for your book, and like why did you end up on the Living Free podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I grew up on a farm in the hills of southern Wisconsin. And so I grew up in Midwestern farm country. And I've carried this story around with me from the beginning. I grew up working with my dad from the time I could walk. And I remember guys driving in the driveway talking to my dad about, well, this farm went under, this farm sold. I always had a sense that the way of life that I was around on our family farm was rare and was slipping away. And I didn't know why that was. And as I grew older, I pursued a writing career. And that writing career is what took me from Wisconsin actually through Tennessee. I was a business and investigative reporter in Nashville, Tennessee for a number of years. And then I worked on Capitol Hill. And then I came back around to Wisconsin. I've lived in different places since and done various things since, but I've never lost that thread along the way of why is this way of life disappearing? And I think it's something that has a huge impact, not only on rural communities like where I'm from, but also every American dinner table, and it has a big impact for those people who want to be able to live close to the land and figure out how to be able to do that. And so, it's a really pressing issue. And with the book, we decided to try to answer that question. So we looked at 100 years of family farm history, and we drove down on, investigated those hidden areas of history that are driving the disappearance of our farms. Why is that happening? What are the consequences? And then we wove that with my family story. And my family, like so many farm families, have so many survival stories from the Great Depression to today, tragic farm accidents, weather that, blesses or threatens, the economic upheaval that occurs and all the hard work and all the beautiful things in between too. So we wove those things together and tried to tell an honest story about what the American farmer is facing.
So what does your life look like today? Are you on the farm and is it your intention to take it over, or have you taken it over?
Good question. So we struggle with all of this, and I talk about it in the book. So my dad's still farming. My sister's actually working to take it over. And I grew up loving my roots. I still help out on the farm on the business side. And when I'm home, they throw me in a tractor on my days off because that's the fate of a farm kid. But it was my sister who really had the talent for cattle and crops like my dad did. And I didn't. And I struggled with that. Although I worked with him all my life, and I still do when I go back, my calling was writing. And so my writing career is what took me off the farm, but it's also what brought me back. And now I live a kind of a unique existence. I was living for a number of years in Wisconsin after I got back from Tennessee and Washington, D.C. And the things we do for love. I met a woman, married my wife, and she's from Northern California. So of all places, it was her life and her job and family that we wanted to be close to as well. So now I actually split my time between Sacramento, California, which is the nation's farm to fork capital. There's a lot of great agriculture around here and along good, strong local food movement. And I split my time between there and the family farm in Wisconsin. And so Northern California isn't something I thought was on my bingo card. But I'm grateful for this life that I have where my writing can be from anywhere. And I really spend a lot of time exploring rural communities all over. Back home in Wisconsin, I'm on the family farm with my family, Northern California, places like Tennessee, all over the country. The resilience that you see in rural communities and, helping to understand the impact that what's going on in rural communities has on the rest of the country is really my calling. And so I'm grateful to be able to do it.
So you have a unique view on this whole family farms being lost issue in that you were an investigative reporter, you worked on Capitol Hill, which means you are aware of some of the political pressures that result in the situation that we're in today. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So what I saw as I was practicing business journalism, investigative journalism, I was covering bank failures, white collar fraud, all kinds of things going on in the Great Recession. And in the course of that, I saw the way that really our economic system was leaving farms behind. And I wanted to get deeper into that, wanted to understand that more deeply. Part of what drew me to Capitol Hill and working in public policy was that I wanted to see, are there things we can do? Are there ways that we can help make sure that our economy stops leaving rural America behind? And I saw some things. I learned a lot about the government process. I worked with some good people, and I saw some kind of, I would say, initial green shoots of possible solutions, but I also saw a lot of frustration and the gridlock of our political system and the inability of, I will say, both political parties, the establishment of the Republican Party as well as the Democrats at different points in our history, to be able to come up with policy solutions and agree on things that we can do. It's really contributed to exactly what you said, which is we have a large systemic issue in this country. There are reasons, economic, governmental, and technological, that our economy has been leaving so many farmers behind. And there are kind of institutional barriers, and they can be addressed, but there's big institutional barriers for anybody who wants to farm, anybody who cares about where their food comes from this country, and anybody who wants to be able to live close to the land. There are ways that our economic structure stands in the way of that. And that's really what I learned as I was going through my years of business journalism, going through my years working close to the public policy process.
So if you were going to say one or two things that you think would be a way to start making systematic change, what would those things be? Like, what's the, or maybe probably easier to say, like, what's the problem and do you see solutions? If so, what are those solutions? Unless I'm going into territory you don't like to go publicly.
No, hey, I go in any territory you want to go in.
Okay. Sometimes I'm like, I'm not trying to.
No. I'm glad to talk about any aspects of this. So the problems are really come in three forms. I reference them briefly, but I'll explain them for a moment. Economic, governmental, and technological. Economic. Anytime we've had an economic crisis in this country, whether it's the Great Depression on up through COVID, the reality is that we don't always understand, or haven't at all really ever understood, the way that it's affecting farms on the ground, and therefore the way it affects our food supply and the rest of the economy. So the Great Depression hit farms in a unique way. Farms were actually in depression for years before the Great Depression. A lot of people don't know that. I didn't know that until I was investigating it. The farm crisis, the more recent recessions, all of these things that have happened in the last several decades, they all hit farms and rural communities in unique ways. And our response as a country often doesn't account for that. And so we end up having really economic crises that linger and last. And there are lasting effects from a lot of these economic crises that are still affecting farms today. The second big category is governmental. I mentioned government mistakes. I'll give you one really clear example. There's many, many of them. The farm crisis in the 1980s was caused by a lot of things. One of the things it was caused by is government not realizing how changing policy can impact things. So the government for a long time was pushing farms to get bigger or get out. One of the ways they were doing that was with government loan programs that were pushing farmers to take out more debt, to get more land, to take on more animals, whatever the case may be. Within a few years of that, they also increased interest rates because they were trying to control inflation. Well, when you can argue for or against those things. You can say, hey, these loan programs are good or bad. You could say, hey, they need to raise interest rates to control inflation, or you can say, hey, they shouldn't raise interest rates. We can have all those economic debates. But regardless of what you think of those things, when you do those two things, one right after the other, the government pushes debt on farmers and then suddenly raises interest rates and make it more expensive, you wipe out tens of thousands of farms for no good reason. And that's an example of the kinds of mistakes that our government has made. There's many others. Technological, this one is really interesting, and it ties a lot to solutions. So technology has moved American agriculture forward. It's also made a lot of things possible for people who are homesteading and other things. I mean, advancement is a good thing, but our technology is also a double-edged sword because we've stopped focusing on making sure that it works for everyone. What I mean by that is we have less scale neutral technology in this country than we used to. Scale neutral is where it can work for landowners of all different sizes, not only large, but also medium and small. It can be practical for a small farm, affordable for a small farm. A lot of our technology isn't like that anymore. It's really technology that gears toward making farms get bigger and bigger. And so the reality is that so many of our farms are being left behind. So those are the challenges, and they're really big ones, right? And there are solutions to them, and I can talk about them, but maybe I should take a breath and see if you have any thoughts on any of those before I dive into what we can do about it too.
Well, the funny thing is I have a background in public policy too. So I worked in free market public policy for about 14 years and was not focused on farming at all. But I'm a homesteader, and I've been a homesteader since 2007. So I raise sheep, and it's very small scale. I want it small scale. I don't want a lot of employees. I don't want to deal with all of that, right? And that's how you make that more profitable. Well, that means that the math on raising the sheep does not work for me. Right? If I was actually trying to make a decent living, let's just say not even $100,000, let's just say like $60,000. A person in a rural Tennessee can live on that right now where I am. I would have to raise 300 sheep.
Yeah.
I am raising 21 sheep. Yeah. So I think you're right. Like on a small scale, it's hard to make something work unless you have some other way that money's coming in. Yeah. And all of the policies look like they're stacked against the small producer. Yeah. Meanwhile, and I'm sure this is covered in your book, meanwhile, the value of my homestead in the last decade has 10x'd. And luckily the property taxes haven't caught up yet, but they're going to, because we have property tax, and you know how that is. Yep. And then over a certain value of this area, when I die and pass it on, if I exceed the inheritance tax amount, which I am not right now, so this is not an issue, somebody in my family would have to sell off land to pay it. And then that makes your farm smaller, which makes it harder to make money. So I think my perspective on the political side is that the government has been too involved in setting the policy for farms. I think the go big or go home policies have set the foundation for losing the family farm, which has reduced the quality and nutrient density of the food, because in order to keep up, you have to use some practices in raising food that are not necessarily the best nutritionally. And then whenever there's a problem, we have a big problem. Yeah. Wherein if we were more diversified, we'd have a smaller problem there that other areas could handle better.
You're absolutely right. I appreciate your knowledge on it. It makes me feel like you've read the book, because we're talking about the exact same issues.
Oh, I want to read the book. Yeah.
We dive deep on those exact issues. And so it's incredible. I think you've encapsulated it exactly right. The reality of the situation is that our government has had a set of policies that have pushed toward get bigger, get out for a very long time. That's created a lot of these large barriers. And you described exactly, as you know, what it means to be land rich, cash poor. Our family has experienced that for a century, where basically that land is continuing to get more and more valuable, but it continues to get harder and harder to make a living on that land. So you could sell it and it'd be, worth something if you sold it, but it's our home, it's our community. After a couple of generations, it's our heritage, and so you want to hold on to it. And the longer you hold on to it, the harder it is to make a living, because all these forces that you're talking about continue to grow in their intensity, So it is a real challenge. And, we should talk about solutions, but I should just note that you hit on something that demonstrates the impact of this. So it's not only hollowing out our rural communities, making it harder and harder for our rural communities to make it, because the farms built the small towns and rural communities in this country. And as the farms have struggled and gone away, a lot of our small towns have begun to shrink and struggle. That's been going on for decades. You add on to that the loss of manufacturing jobs in more recent decades. I wonder why people are economically frustrated in rural America, And here's the thing. It affects people who have never worked the land, never set foot in a barn, never sheared a sheep. Every family in this country is affected by this because of what you said about that loss of economic diversity. So we've had this system where it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and requiring that whether it's farmers or other businesses, they be larger to be able to keep up with everything. So what that means is we've got a very concentrated food industry. So the food companies are keeping up with the rest of the American economy, trying to get bigger and bigger. The ag businesses, agribusiness is keeping up with the food companies. The farmers have to keep up with them. So what happens? Well, when you have a disaster like COVID, or and that was across the food economy, but even like bird flu affecting the price of eggs and chicken. When you have some kind of a disaster, let's say like one great big distribution center goes down, you have such big players in our supply chain that if they have one big distribution center go down, that affects the supply in a serious way. So that's why during COVID, people remember they couldn't get what they needed on the grocery store shelves. And if they could, it was more expensive. That was happening at the same time that small producers, especially, couldn't sell their goods, or if they could, it was for a much lower price. Why is that going on? It's because that supply chain is locked up. All the food products and crops are locked up. So if you have a big distribution center go down, it has an outsized impact on your food supply. The prices are shooting up. So our food system is a modern miracle in certain ways. Any kind of food, any part of the country, any time of year. But in other ways, it's deeply, deeply vulnerable because of the issues that we're talking about.
Absolutely. It's funny that you bring up COVID because at that time, I knew enough about the commercial food system that I was able to work around the shortages in some really funny ways, where you couldn't get flour to make bread in California, where my family is. And they wanted to bake bread because they were home, and you couldn't really get bread on the shelves. And so I was like, well, I have a flour grinder and I have wheat berries, and I will mail you. And because I have a coffee roaster, right? I sent them coffee bags, what I would usually package my coffee beans in, full of fresh ground flour to California. And then to resupply, I couldn't get wheat berries even at that point. You couldn't get like Montana wheat or anything on the commercial system. But if you were a beer brewer, you could buy wheat. And it was the same wheat. And so the brewing supply stores and the feed supply stores had it. You just had to know that it's not like it's magically a different grade of wheat at the beer, you're still making it into food.
Right.
But a lot of people think that that's somehow different. It's kind of like pet medication that's made at the same factory in the same lots as human medication is the same medication.
Yeah.
But unless you know that, you think it's like somehow magically different, and then that's a problem. But you had to really think outside the box during that time.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile, as a small producer, I have I have a tower of duck eggs out there. And people are spending $8 a dozen to $10 a dozen at the grocery store for $2 a dozen eggs.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And we used to have a country where people were buying their food in a variety of ways. And that meant a lot of entrepreneur opportunity for our farmers. We tell the story of my great-grandparents, parents all the way through. And my great-grandparents, they lived in a time where you not only milk cows, which is something that became to dominate the Wisconsin farming industry, of course, but they were selling bull calves. They were selling chicken and duck and geese eggs. They were pulling the feathers to, create feather mattresses. They were selling the cream off the milk. They were selling any kind of, fruit and vegetable you could pull from the ground. And there was a lot of different types of crops and products. Now that was subsistence farming, and they were trying to reach that next level and make a better living. But there was all this entrepreneur opportunity. Along the way, our food system got so big and it forced everyone to get so specialized that we ended up losing a lot of that. A lot of farms really now produce one or two top products, one or two top crops. And the reality is that we don't have to go as far as we did. It was good for agriculture to advance. It was good that we don't have to have everybody in the country growing their own food. Although I think everybody should have some sort of a garden. And I think anybody who wants to live close to land and wants to homestead or wants to start a farm should do it and should have the freedom to do that in this country. But some of that advancement, we lost things along the way. We lost that connection between the farmer and the consumer. We lost all those pathways that someone like you is able to find in a crisis. Most people have no idea what to do in that scenario. And the reality is that just shows that things have gone too far in this country. We can have a modern economy and still have people who love and work close to the land. And it's a good thing that we have a tradition of small land ownership in this country and small farms and producers, because that's our resilience. That's our resilience. The food system that was such a miracle that has advanced, and was telling us we have to just continue heading in this direction. It's no longer providing the affordable food that it once did. So we've got a problem. You can't lose 45,000 farms per year on average for a century, which is what we've been doing, and not run into these problems where we don't have a secure food supply.
So how do you see us fixing that?
Yeah.
What do you see as some options at this point?
Yep. So the clearest insights into that I got was when I had the chance to figure out what happened in our broader economy and try to apply that to my family survival story and figure out some of those false choices that our country has made. There's a number of things we can do. All of them center on how do we create more entrepreneurial opportunity, new entrepreneurial opportunity for our farms, because we haven't done that in a long time. The first thing is research and development revolution. We have to make sure that our technology stops leaving our small and medium-sized farms behind. We need technology that can work for large as well as medium and small farms. So now that means that the private sector, that a lot of the large companies, they have to understand that it's in their interest to be able to create equipment and other types of technology that can work for farms of all sizes. Because look, we've lost 70% of our farms. We've got just under 2 million left. If we lose them at the same pace that we continue to lose them for the next 40 years, in 40 years, we'll have lost the majority of our family farms. And that is not in the interest of these companies that work in our agriculture and food industry. So they need to understand that and look at the long term. That's the case I make to them, but also with our government. We need to add accountability around government research and development, see if we can build support to have it focused around the kinds of things that we need, the kinds of advancements that can help small producers and medium-sized producers be able to innovate just as well as anybody else. Next thing is we need to make sure we have fair markets. You and I have some things in common in terms of types of public policy that we've worked on. Low taxes, less regulation, fewer steps that people have to go through to figure out how to profitably grow food in this country is a really important thing. We also have to make sure that our subsidies, we don't have as much picking of winners and losers that's going on. We need to have a whole overhaul of all that. But we also have to make sure that our markets are fair. And the reality is that the little guy in this country has for a long time not been able to compete on solid, fair ground. There's a lot of companies that are able to shut out competition and pursue anti-competitive practices. We have to be able to put a stop to that. There's a foreign trade element to this that we can dive into as well to make sure that foreign markets are fair. And that's a controversial issue right now that we can absolutely get into. And then we need consumers to keep moving in the direction of creating market demand for this new entrepreneur opportunity. So if we've got innovation coming to all of our producers, if we've got fairer markets for our producers and the government out of the way in the places where the government is in the way, we need to have consumers also taking more steps toward this. People care more than ever about where their food comes from post-COVID. That's a good thing. A lot more people are looking at where can I get my food in addition to my traditional sources. We need more of that. We have to meet people where they are. People who go to the local grocery store, they need to be asking for local goods because a lot of grocers are willing to carry it if they know that people will buy it. And then also patronize your local butcher shop, patronize your local farmer's market, get connected with a CSA, contract with a farmer down the road who can sell you half a beef. All these things, if every American consumer took a half step toward all this stuff, it would revolutionize the entire food economy, because that the American private sector system would work to try to get to it. And farmers want to grow things that people want to buy. There are just so many barriers to that right now. So those are some of the solutions. There's more, but those are some big, large ones. And the challenge is we kind of have to hold hands and jump in the water all at once, because all those things need to change and more.
Yeah, and the trick there is when you flip the switch, it's chaos. So we've got a guy here who his family farm was a Tyson chicken producing. So they had the big, chicken houses. And he was really into regenerative agriculture, wanted to do more of the Joel Salatin rotational pig raising stuff. And he was not legally, by contract with Tyson, can't do that on the same property. Even if it's 80 acres over there, because they're afraid it's going to, impact the chickens by making them sick. Well, his dad died. He took the farm over, philosophically opposed to how they're raising chickens for many reasons. And he said, I just fulfilled the contract for a few more years. And the minute that contract was over, I started completely. So they now use the barns that he has them tricked out for a natural way of raising pigs called Korean natural farming, which uses a mulching process for the pigs. and doesn't have them so confined. And it's taken him, I think, 3 or 4 years to start making a profit. So he had to pull the switch and then no money for 4 years before he starts making money. And then for him, he has to tell his story all the time, or people don't understand what they're buying, why they're paying that much for pork. And it's like, well, because A, this pork tastes like no pork you've ever tasted before at the store. And B, it's because it's truly, raised without any inputs of the type of chemicals a lot of people in our network, my network, are trying to avoid. So when I heard his story, I really thought like there needs to be a roadmap for farms who want to get out of some of those unhealthy relationships to chemical agriculture, if they want to, without just throwing the switch and hoping you don't lose everything, A, and B, with the incentives the way they've been for the farmers getting subsidies from the government, if you just remove those subsidies, more family farms are going to be gone.
That's right. That's right. You're talking about a dilemma that we dive deep into and that is central to this issue. And our family lives it. We are a traditional Wisconsin dairy farm, small, 50 cows, raising corn, soybeans, hay, different things that you use to feed dairy animals, and then whatever we can sell on the side. That was our traditional model. We've been in a process of trying to evolve, and that roadmap that you're talking about, I can tell you that farms like ours need that roadmap, and we're trying to figure out in our case. But to expect the entire American agriculture economy to move, we have to have a better one. And so our journey has been this. In spring of 2021, my dad sold the dairy herd because we either would have had to, again, get bigger, get out. We would have had to expand to several hundred cows, or a couple thousand really, to have the dairy operation profitable on into the long term as my sister worked to take it over. And instead of doing that, we decided to diversify the farm. And selling that dairy herd was one of the hardest things I've ever seen my dad do. It's like a death in the family. I mean, he knew every cow. We had names for them, and the reality is that it just wasn't scalable anymore unless we wanted to get really, really big. So we decided to sell the herd. And what we've been doing since is we're grateful to do it at a point where we were able to hold onto our land. My dad got the farm through the farm crisis without debt, and got to this point. And so we've got the land. So that's something that we can continue to work. So we sold the cows, and we're now raising custom heifers for other dairy herds, some milk cows for other dairy herds. We're raising beef for consumers, and we're raising a variety of cash crops. And we're always looking for that new crop or product. What's that new thing we can put in the ground, or what's the, pasture raised eggs, whatever it is, new crop, new product that we can do to try to move toward that new food economy. And you're right, you can't do it all at once. Because if you do that, you suddenly have an expensive operation that's making no money. And at the same time, you're trying to find ways to kind of shift toward it. So we're in the middle of that gradual process. And it's really important for people to recognize that farms are small businesses. I'm grateful that your friend made it through what he did. And I hope he has continued success and is able to build up the kind of income he needs. But a lot of farms, go under in that process. And if we don't have our whole country and government policy understanding that, the reality is, look, these farms, they operate on really tight margins, as and if they are making a change, they've got to have some sense that there's going to be market demand for it. They've got to be able to make the transition. They have to spend money on the transition and go without the money on what they were doing before. And it's a hard situation. I still think there's reason for optimism because we do have so many resilient families out there living close to the land. There are people who are doing this even though it doesn't work economically. Imagine what they can accomplish if we make it work economically, both for the farmer, but also for the consumer, the choices that we could have in this country for our food, if we can get, our farms through this transition.
Have you looked into any of the states where they've gone just full freedom on food, like Maine, and what's happened with their local cottage food? And how do you think that can relate to where we're at? And
it's really interesting cases, and you're seeing all kinds of things that are working and not working. And it's a fascinating situation. And I think that the reality is some kinds of moves in that direction, I think, do prove to work because you do see that there is a desire. I mean, there are certain types of products that people want. I mean, the raw milk movement and all of that kind of stuff. Like there are things that people will buy. The funny thing is, it's not funny. I shouldn't say it's the strange thing, the dystopian thing is those things that would be fairly easy for a small or medium-sized farm to produce and sell to customers directly, locally, people that know where their food comes from, all that kind of stuff, are some of the things where there's some of the worst barriers in the way, And so I do think there's lessons to take from those states that are trying to do that. And I think we need to continue to figure out state by state what's working. And there also need to be changes on the federal level, so that there's more freedom for people who want to sell food and people who want to buy food. I mean, here's the thing that's crazy. You can have, the appropriate amount of government attention to making sure that there's safety and that our food is okay for people to consume, and have more freedom. Because right now what we have is very little freedom, and we still have outbreaks of all kinds of stuff, and we have all kinds of food that isn't healthy for us, so we're kind of getting it backwards. And the reality is that you can have a set of regulations that can allow for safe food, and have more options for people that can be better tasting, healthier farm, and ultimately a more secure food system.
It is a scale issue, and I think one of the biggest policy problems with setting standards for food safety is that we set standards for food safety for very large operations, which is completely meaningless, becomes a barrier to entry for smaller operations. I just saw a recall this week for hot sauce, and I'm like, what's this hot sauce recall? That's interesting. And it was that I don't remember the brand, and it's not important, but they make like a chicken wing hot sauce, was recalled because when they changed the line from sriracha to that, there was an ingredient that was a possible allergy risk for people that got, in that transition time where the two sauces mixed. That part got mixed. Well, the reason that happened is it's a giant factory doing one kind of sauce on the line, not properly switching it over and then doing the next sauce.
Yeah.
And then we're really worried about the label matching what's in the jar. Wherein our friends who make hot sauce in Kentucky, they're making a batch at a time and hand packaging this. It's a totally different risk level. Now, if they're processing it wrong or not putting enough acid into that hot sauce, which they are, it's fine. Then that's a different kind of problem. And those are two totally different things, but we try to make one set of standards for everybody, and it just does not work. It doesn't work in forestry. It doesn't work in food safety. It doesn't work for the American farms, nothing.
Yeah, totally. And this is where one of the places where our political system is really failing us in big ways, because here's the reality. The Democratic Party that has often had government program solutions for things and things we need to regulate and all that sort of stuff. In many cases, the smaller producers, small farms, small businesses, or whoever they're talking about trying to help are some of the folks that are harmed the most because the regulation is passed. And it is something that, at the end of the day, the biggest operators, sometimes it's designed for them because of regulatory capture. But even if it isn't designed for them, they've got the army of lobbyists and lawyers and accountants and everybody that can help them figure out how to navigate those programs. And so, what ends up happening to the smallest producer is that they end up just dealing with the red tape, and they got no solution for themselves. And so sometimes the policies that are designed to help are the ones that hurt the most because of unintended consequences. Now, the other part of it is, the Republican Party has had maybe more faith, I'll say, in the private sector, but it has also allowed those largest players to influence them so much that they don't realize, or maybe aren't looking at the ways that our small businesses, small farmers, or businesses in any industry are affected by these regulations and don't have the resources to be able to deal with them. And so the reality is that both parties have left us a government that really kind of leaves the little guy behind, even though both parties are happy to talk about the little guy come election time.
So back to your book, when did you know what, this is what I want to write about, and this is how I see it coming together with my own family farm?
Yeah. I realized this actually when I was in Nashville, Tennessee. I was having lunch with a person in the policy world, and we were talking about the issue that taxes have on the exact time period you're talking about, where if you want to pass the land on, the death tax and all this. We were talking about all these things, and we were talking about the fact that farms are land rich, cash poor, and I had just been covering the economy for a couple of years, and it was when I was really realizing the way that ways of life like I grew up with and like you were practicing were being left behind. And that's where it clicked. I said, this question that I've had ever since I was a little kid running around following my dad around the farmyard about why our farm's disappearing. It's because of the ways that our economic political system are leaving us behind now. It took me a number of years to get the chance to be able to focus on that in my career the way that I wanted to. But that's when the idea really clicked. And so I, had the opportunity to come back around to it. And it was almost a decade later when I finally had the chance to be able to focus in my career on being able to look at this. But about 2, 3 years ago, I really started investigating it really closely. I'd had all these family stories I'd pieced together for a long time. I'd realized there when I was in Tennessee how I wanted to try to combine that with the broader issues going on to try to answer this question. And then, 2, 3 years ago, I started, assembling these family stories, figuring out which ones would be the best way to show people in a raw, honest way what families go through. And I started building the research around that to figure out, okay, well, when my grandpa was growing up in 2 decades of poverty during the Ag Depression and then the Great Depression, and we're telling the story of him climbing into the middle class, what was going on big picture that was making it harder to do that? And so we just started to kind of construct it in that way.
Awesome. And how long did it take you to write the book when you actually sat down to do the thing?
Yeah, good question. I would say it was about a year. I had a couple of chapters at the beginning of the process as we were working to get the publishing deal, and then you get the deal, and then you're the dog that caught the car, right? And so you get finishing up. It was an incredible process. It was a blessing, chance to be part of it. It was a lot of work. I write in the early morning, 5 a.m, when only the farmers are awake. It's when I think clearest and when I can get things done before the rest of my work gets a hold of me for the day. And it was an incredible experience, and there were a lot of mornings with tears as I was trying to figure out what to include and how to tell my family story in an honest way. We deal with a lot of difficult issues very honestly about, not only economic upheaval and the things that, tragic farm accidents and weather can do to people living close to land, but also mental health issues and addiction issues and other things that our family wrestled with, that we talked about, that we decided we wanted to be open and honest with people about. My dad said it best. He said, you got to tell people the truth. You got to tell them the whole story. And if we want people to come along and care about our farmers and care about our land, you have to be willing to share things that are happy, but also things that were challenges.
Let's talk about the mental health issues a little bit, because I was supposed to go down that road and we got off on policy. What sorts of mental health issues do you cover in the book, and how do you see that helping other farmers avoid it or address it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we go right into it. In the first couple pages, we talk about the day after my dad sold the cows. And although we had the land and had a plan for how to transition our farm, again, selling the cows was like a death in the family. And for a guy like my dad, he was the first in 4 generations who wasn't milking cows on that land. And he was questioning his purpose. And I found out in the course of the book that he was struggling with an issue that so many of our farmers deal with. Farming is one of the top industries for suicide in this country because of the pressure that people face of trying to figure out how to keep that farm going, and either continuing and facing the day when they tell their family they can't provide for them anymore, or turning around and selling that land that is everything to them. And you get that generational pressure building on top of that. And my dad was dealing with that. And in the course of the book, I tell a story at the beginning of the book where we're standing on the porch of a little cabin I have out back of the woods, out back of the farmhouse where we both grew up, and we're standing there on my cabin porch. And I remember he was in tears, and I remember wondering, because we'd had farmers down the road who had taken their own lives. I remember wondering if he was having those kinds of thoughts. And I found out in the course of talking to him for the book that he had been. And so we shared and confessed that throughout the course of the book. And I'm happy to say my dad's alive and well. And we got through it. And the way we got through it was by talking about these issues. There was a group called the Farmer Angel Network that began just down the road from us because of a local farmer who'd taken his life. And they knew how important it was to have peer-to-peer support, meaning farmers talking to farmers, people in rural communities talking to people in rural communities, because farm families, they're not going to share their business, and so we had people who came into our lives who helped us talk about it. And my dad got through it really thinking about the next generation. He was thinking about his grandkids, and what he had to teach them. And he realized that there's value to the farmer, whatever happens to the farm. And I'm grateful every day that he got through that. And but we take that pretty head on. We also talk about issues of addiction. I had a drinking problem for a number of years that I was able to step back from. My grandpa Alcohol was a big part of his life. He grew up in the poverty of the Depression, climbing middle class. He was a kind, gentle man, accomplished an incredible thing. One of the things he carried on his back as the cost of that was a drinking problem for most of his life, So we try to be honest about those things because it's the only way that you're going to address them is by sharing. And when I talked to my dad about his own struggles, I asked him, I said, do we want to share this? And he said, we gotta. He said, we gotta, because I want people to know they're not alone. There's other people dealing with it. So that's what we decided to do. There's a lot of things that need to be done around mental health, but the first step is talking about it and showing that there's strength, not shame, and sharing what you're dealing with,
Yeah, the only way to deal with that issue is to talk about that issue. And that's not just in the farming communities, but in our society. We either talk about it so much that it's not helpful, or we don't talk about it at all because we don't want people to know. It's shameful. And finding that happy medium and empowering people to take the steps they need to take, which is different for everybody, is a hard one. So I really am glad that you included that honesty in your family story in your book, because more people need to know that. Oh, it's not just me.
Yeah, that's right. As soon as you realize this, you're not alone. And the other thing I tell people too is like, look, there are times where people are in crisis. And I hope that they get the resources they need in that moment before it's too late. But there's also things that build. I mean, a lot of people say, oh, I don't have mental health challenges. I'm not depressed or whatever. It's just sort of like people, look, dealing with your day-to-day struggles and understanding how things build and understanding how it's good to talk about your feelings and it's good to share what you're going through. And if you do feel yourself going into a difficult place, talking and figuring out what kind of help you need, because a lot of us need help a lot more often, a lot earlier than we'd want to recommend. And again, it's not a matter of weakness. It's a matter of strength to see that because we're all dealing with stuff, and it's important to recognize that. So I always tell people it's a lighthearted way to talk about it. I grew up picking rock by hand in the fields before my dad got a rock picker. And I say, when you grow up picking rock by hand, you learn to kind of keep your head down and get the work done. And it's good, the work ethic it teaches you. But you also gotta look up from the field now and then and admit if something's hard on you. And our farm families just aren't raised to understand that second part,
Picking rocks is never done, by the way, guys.
That's right. It's an endless job.
More come.
That's right.
It's like you chose one of the worst farm tasks to talk about.
Absolutely. A lot of people have earned their stripes doing that. So
yeah. Don't envy you that job at all. But you made it. And okay, so what is the best way for people to get their hands on your book? Let's tell them the title again. How can they connect with you to kind of keep this conversation going?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. The book is Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer. And you can find Land Rich, Cash Poor anywhere you get books. People have all kinds of different preferences. I always give everyone all of them. You can find it on Amazon and other places that you buy books online. It's also available in bookstores nationwide. They'll have it or they can order it for you. As far as keeping in touch with me, I am on my website and I do answer the emails that come in. It's at www.brian-reisinger.com. Brian, B-R-I-A-N Reisinger, R-E-I-S-I-N-G-E-R. And I'm also on X at Brian J. Reisinger. And I appreciate
call it X?
Yeah, I do. I don't know. I call it whatever, it calls itself, I guess.
That's funny.
X/Twitter/ whatever you want to call it. So, and I'm on there and I welcome anybody to interact with me on there or to get in touch with my website who want to keep the conversation going. I appreciate anyone who picks up the book. And irregardless, I just appreciate anyone who's paying attention to these issues and helps us keep the conversation going to see if we can make some change.
Yeah. And it looks like you could just go to brian-reisinger.com and connect with the book.
Yep.
These are all the ways to order. Do any of those make you more money than any other ones?
Great question. It is all agnostic for me. I make the same money, whatever route people go. I always just tell people whatever works for you. So go for it. So we've got Amazon linked on there. We've got a link to finding local independent bookstores, if that's your preference, whatever it may be.
Okay. Super. I'd like to throw people to the website if at all possible. I'm sorry that was a little longer than usual for me to get to the website than usual because I have this useless thing here.
Hope that wasn't from picking rock.
No, it was from drinking coffee, I'm sure. It's been working fine for days. And then today, it was like 5 minutes before we got on. I was like, oh, great. Good thing I have a second computer here. So, yeah. Guys, I highly recommend dive. So one of the things that helps the human brain absorb complex problems and remember them and retain the information is story. So the fact that Brian has woven story into what is a hard economic policy and cultural problem is a great way to really internalize what's going on, so that when you're talking to people later, you can say, oh, well, this is the problem, because it will be programmed into your brain when you've absorbed it by story. But you'll also have emotional examples, because people buy on emotion and justify with facts. And that is hard for many of us more policy wonky people to accept, but it is true. And I think having real life examples is helpful. So check out his book. Go to Brian-Reisinger, Reisinger. I'll have links in all the show notes for the audio podcast, as well as it's already in the description on the YouTube and Facebook streams. Brian, I want to thank you for being on today.
Thank you so much, Rami. I appreciate it. Thank you for all you're doing to raise awareness of what people can do with the land and the hard work you put in. I think it's so important to be having conversations like this.
Awesome, guys. Well, if you like the show and want to support the work here, head over to livingfreeintennessee.com to become a member, or get your coffee at hollerroast.com. With that, guys, go out, make it a great week.